nothing better than worshiping God. Psalm 33 says, it's time to sing and shout for joy. Go ahead, all you redeemed ones, and do it. Praise him with all that you have. Praise looks good and lovely on the lips of God's lovers. Play the guitar as you lift your praises loaded with thanksgiving. Sing and make joyous music with all you've got inside. Let everything and everyone that has breath praise the Lord this morning. It's so good and lovely to worship God. It looks good on you.
I searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. A man's empty praise and treasures of faith are never enough. Then you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. There's nothing, oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Yes, I know it's true, and I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, failures and flaws. Lord, you see them all, and you still call me friend. No, 'cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley. There's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. There's nothing, there is nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. Oh, there's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You turn graves. You turn graves into gardens. You turn boats into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You turn graves. You turn graves into gardens. You turn boats into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. turn mourning. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves. Oh, you turn graves into gardens. Oh, you turn bones into armies. You turn seas into highways. You're the only one who can. You're the only one. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. You're the only one who can. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe through every battle, through every heart, through every circumstance. I believe that you are my fortress, you are my portion, you are my hiding place. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe through every blessing, through every promise, through every breath I take. I believe that you are provider, you are protector, you are the one I love. Through every blessing, through every blessing, through every promise, through every breath I take. I believe that you are provider, you are protector, you are the one I love. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, yeah, the light. It's a new horizon. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. Set on you, and you meet me here today. Mercies that are new, all my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you, and you meet me here today. Mercies that are new, fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long. And I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. His face shine upon you, be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give peace. The Lord bless you and keep you, make His face shine upon you. Gracious to you, the Lord turn His face toward you
children, their children. May his favor be upon you and 1,000
generations, and your family, and your children, and your children, and your children.
May his favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you, he is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 he is for you,
He's for you. He's for you.
He's for you, he's for you, he's for you, he's for you, he's for you.
Amen. Amen. His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations. It's your family, and your children, and the children, and the children. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you.
He is with you
In the morning,
in the morning,
in the evening, and you're coming, and you're going, and you're weeping and rejoicing. It's for you. May his favor
be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children.
May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you,
all around you, within you,
in the morning,
in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you,
He's for you.
for you,
He's for you.
for you.
Amen. We bless you, Lord. So good to see you guys here today. That is such a powerful song. I mean, it really is just a song I think God raised up in this hour, anointed. And of course, it's based on a very ancient prayer. Many of you may know. It's called a Aaronic blessing. It's found in Numbers chapter 6. It was the blessing that the Lord told Moses and Aaron forever to pray over his people. So it's one of the most powerful, beautiful, simple, short prayers. I encourage you to pray this over your family and over everyone. It's a prayer that's meant to be prayed over others. All right, and so it's just powerful. Anyways, so good to see you guys. We're so glad. Welcome to the trial run. I just want to say hi to those who are watching online, and we know you guys are with us in spirit, and by the Spirit, we're with you guys. We just bless you, and we love you, and hope to see you at one point here as well, just when we can gather more fully. You guys can go ahead and be seated. You know, we are calling this our trial run. You guys are good, thanks. You know, we're a little rusty, so give us a little grace this morning. You know, the whole closure thing came on us so quickly, and we were scrambling, trying to figure out how to go online, and that was kind of a learning experience for a lot of us. You know, trying to preach in front of a camera is weird, especially when you've been used to it. I've been so used to preaching in front of, live people. It was an odd thing, and of course, Kevin's just amazing, guys. Rev Kev. Very, very, very talented. One of the hardest things to do was to, make sure we looked thin. I don't know about you, but I gained 15 pounds during this thing, staying home. And, of course, you look 10 pounds heavier on camera. 25 pounds Kevin had to take off me. Not the easiest thing. By the way, Kevin is a photographer, videographer. You can actually hire him, and for an extra fee, he makes you look thin on all your pictures and your videos. So anyways. All right. Hey, in terms of offerings, we just have a box in the back, and I know a lot of you have been giving online, mobile. We're so thankful to everybody who has just continued to give. I know it's times like this, it's kind of a little extra step of faith to be able to continue to be generous, to continue to support the work of the gospel in the church. So we're really super thankful. And so you can use the box back there if you're live, and of course you can always continue to give online, and you can go to rolcf.net/giving, and you can do that. So if all goes well today, and so far it's going pretty good. Next week we're going to do 2 services. We are we're doing our best to sort of honor the guidelines that we're being given as best we can, and even if they're sometimes a little crazy. And anyways, our basic philosophy here is we do want to operate in honor. We certainly do want to make sure there's safety, and of course, this whole thing should be taken seriously. But we also just like to treat people like adults and assume you'll act responsibly and just make your own good choices for yourself, and just assume, just assume other people are trying to practice things as well. So don't assume, things like close contact unless everybody is in agreement. I'm kind of in full contact mode right now myself, but I respect those who are different. Anyways, so that's what's happening next week. And by the way, things are changing every single week. And I've heard through some officials that the governor will be announcing guidelines this week for churches, and really, really hopeful they're going to move beyond this arbitrary 49 and go more to a percent or based on occupancy. So just stay tuned. We're just we'll be making changes as changes come. And, we want to be back to as many people as we can safely as soon as we can. So just stay tuned. All right. I think that's kind of it for announcements. There's no kid dismissal this morning. Oh, by the way, when we go to 2 services, the second service is going to have kids ministry. Nothing during the first, but the second service will. So if you have kids in your family, you want to sign up for the second service if you want them to go to kids ministry. Of course, if you prefer not to, you can keep them with you. If you're not going to take advantage of the kids ministry, the first service is probably a good option. If you don't have kids in your family or anything, that's a good, so that way you leave openings in the second service for those with kids. All right. All righty. Now I have to re-practice preaching live. I can do it, because I can do all things through him who strengthens me. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. You know, it is, of course, it's so hard not to be distracted right now or overwhelmed. I don't know about you, but I've got Zoom fatigue, and I definitely have virus fatigue. I mean, there's the virus, there's all the disruptions, there's some of the heavy-handed response, there's the politics. Oh, yikes. There's the debate about how to move forward and how fast. And I have been just, kind of fascinated by even the debate within the church about how to respond to this. And that's been kind of interesting. But I'll talk about that maybe in some videos I'm going to release this week. My primary interest, honestly, is the question, where is God in all of this? Where is God in this coronavirus? And, it's not just relevant to us. I think particularly during this time, it is very relevant to the wider culture. And I kind of want to share a little bit about it this morning, not just for your benefit and my benefit, but, to remind us that we have a wider responsibility to the culture within which we live. And right now, this is a particularly relevant question for the wider culture. And I think it really does tie in with the current series on the Spirit of God and I'll kind of hopefully make that tie in for us. It's been a very disorienting for us as a society, what we've been going through. And it's not just because it's causing major disruption, which it is, but it really forces us to face our own vulnerability and our own mortality. And honestly, that's something that living in America the last 70 years, we have not had to do at this scale before. And so where is God in all of this? And the short answer is he is present. He is present in the midst of this. But that's not necessarily the obvious answer, particularly for the wider culture. And a lot of people in times like this actually come to the opposite conclusion. It looks like God is more absent than he is present. And in a world that is just full of uncertainty, and even death, where are we going to put our... sound like I went out. Are you going to put it in our government leaders? If it's not clear by now, I unfortunately think it might be even more clear later that they may have caused more disruption and suffering than the virus itself. We're going to put it in the medical system. A lot of this all started over fear and panic that system would actually collapse if we didn't take drastic actions. Are we going to put it in the Lord? And I want to look at a story that probably most of you in this room are very familiar with. Those watching, you may be. Hopefully this video is being shared beyond our own congregation. I've used this or I've referenced this particular story in a lot of my sermons, and I use it a lot because it has so many applications. And it's one of those stories that it really helps to reveal the overall message of the gospel. And it's the story of Lazarus. Or more specifically, the story of his death and being raised back from the dead by Jesus. And it's a very important story in the Gospel of John. And actually, in the Gospel of John, it's the only place where it's actually recorded. Now, you may ask, what does this story have to do with a pandemic? And I think it has a lot to do with a pandemic. And, when you see a pandemic really as widespread suffering, it's really a summation of individual suffering. And this is the story of a family who suffered a devastating loss. And Lazarus had two sisters. It appears that this was a close-knit family. It was a family that Jesus seemed to visit often when he would be in Jerusalem. They lived in Bethany, which was just outside of Jerusalem. And, Jesus had recently been in Jerusalem and had stirred up a lot of opposition. Matter of fact, they got so mad at him at one point, they actually picked up stones to stone him to death. They just wanted to kill him. And so Jesus left with his disciples. He left Jerusalem, went to another part of the country. And while he was traveling, Lazarus, who was a friend of his, becomes very ill. I mean, like deathly ill. Like they're really scared that Lazarus is going to die. And so they send word to Jesus, expecting him to come because he's the healer. They'd seen him heal. Except Jesus doesn't come. When Jesus gets word that Lazarus is sick, it says he stayed right where he was. It often feels like God is absent. And of course, when he gets this word, and the word that comes is Lazarus is literally, he's ill and he's on his deathbed. Would you come? And Jesus makes the statement, he says, he's not going to die. He's not going to die. And by the way, it's all happening so that the glory of God can be revealed. In other words, God has something much bigger and much better in mind. And that can be hard sometimes, can it, for us to look beyond our individual circumstance and see that maybe God has something bigger and better in mind. And of course, Jesus stays right where he is. And then when he knows by the Spirit that Lazarus has actually died, at that point, he decides to visit the family. And of course, as he goes to visit the family, one of the sisters is the first one to run out to him. And she comes out and she's looking for some answers. And so she says to Jesus, and I'm sure many of us in this room, I know I have said something very similar. She says these famous words, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Have you ever said something like that? Lord, if you had just been here and done something, this would not have happened. And of course, that kind of question brings up so many other questions, like, does he love us? Can he do something about this? And so she's looking for answers. And Jesus gives her an interesting response. He says to her, your brother shall rise again. Now, I love how he says that. I don't know if you've ever picked this up before or noticed this. He doesn't say Lazarus will rise again. He says, your brother. There's something about the resurrection that's really, truly is going to sustain even some of the relationships you have today. It's not just Lazarus is going to rise, but your brother is going to rise. I know you want me to go more on that, but I got a time limit here. Now, Martha's kind of funny. She's obviously taken a little bit of theology. She's like, listen, I took the foundations class. I know he'll rise again on the last day. So she's getting into like a little theology discussion with Jesus. She took the theology class. And so then Jesus just completely blows her mind. He's like, I am the resurrection and the life. Now, you've heard that a lot, but you got to kind of think about what that would have meant to Martha. I mean, you can almost see her in some of her response, like the wheels beginning to spin, like, what? He says, he who believes in me will live even if he dies, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? he's like, basically like that little theology lesson that you had about the resurrection. Well, guess what? I'm the one who's going to be doing the resurrection, which is blowing her mind at this point. Like, oh my goodness. Like you could almost see the wheels spinning. Like, okay, wait. We knew, because she goes on and says, I knew you were the Christ. Like, I kind of knew you were, but I had no idea the Christ would be the one doing the resurrecting. And he's there. He's the Christ, and it is the Christ who will do the resurrection. And you can just see her mind just begin to kind of wrap around this. Well, of course, she's so stunned, she runs to get her sister Mary. Says, hey, Mary, Jesus is asking for you. So Mary comes out to see Jesus. And she says the exact same thing as her sister Martha. Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Now, I don't know if you ever noticed in the story, Jesus responds very differently to her. Why does he respond differently to her? Well, because Mary is not looking for answers. She's looking for comfort. I love this. And the text makes it really clear. She's weeping. She leaves her house weeping. And when she gets to Jesus, she literally just collapses in front of him. She falls right down at his feet, weeping. If you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. She wasn't looking for Martha was looking for answers. Mary was looking for comfort. And when Jesus sees her weeping, and when he sees those around her weeping, and when he sees how this tragedy has devastated this family, John says Jesus is deeply moved and deeply troubled. And Jesus begins to weep. To the sister who needs answers, Jesus says, I am the answer. To the sister who needs comfort and can do nothing but cry, Jesus cries with her. I just love that story. And to me, it's so relevant to the time. I mean, people are responding all different kinds of ways to what is going on. And there's got to be a sensitivity within us to what people need in that moment, knowing that Jesus, if someone needs answers, he's the answer. If someone needs comfort, he's there to cry. Sometimes crying with somebody is more powerful than preaching at somebody and giving them nice little pat Christian answers. And so, of course, Jesus comes to the tomb and he says, open the stone. Take the stone away. You have to be able to see some of the humor inside of the Bible. Sometimes it's harder, but you just got to put yourself in the story. And to me, this is hilarious. Martha, now remember, Martha is the thinking sister, right? She's the one who wants answers. She's thinking through this. She's the thinking sister. And she's like, Jesus, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Listen, not only do I know a little theology, I know a little bit about what happens to dead bodies. And listen, my brother might have been a little smelly when he was alive, but he's going to really stink now, like a good sister. And, of course, Jesus says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus comes out. What a voice our Lord has. And this is one of the things that John wants to emphasize in his gospel. What a voice Jesus has. And it is the voice of Jesus that operates the resurrection. But not only is it a powerful voice that raises the dead, it comes from a tender, compassionate one who weeps with us. You know, when you follow the story that John tells us, the one who weeps with us is also the one who actually enters into suffering himself. The voice of resurrection suffers with us. And more importantly, he suffers for us so that suffering may finally be removed from us. It is good news. And this is the story we want to tell people. Because Jesus made the most incredible promise. It is the hope that we hang our hats on as Christians. Whoever believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Can you believe this? Will you believe this? But I tell you what, there's a lot more good news. I mean, that's pretty good news. That would be, you could be full right now. We could close the service. You could go home. You could be full. It would be good. It's good news. But listen, this promise is not just a future promise. It's not just a future promise. If you go on in John's gospel, and I want to go to John chapter 14. And I have spent so much time lately, and so much of my preaching in the last couple of years actually has been from John 14, 15, 16. It's just one of my favorite sections of Scripture. It is the depths of these chapters cannot be found fully. And the promises in them are incredible. But Jesus says this in the beginning of chapter 14. He says, do not let your heart be troubled. Do not let your heart be troubled. That's a pretty kind of radical statement, don't you say? I mean, the world has a little bit of trouble in it. Do not let your heart be troubled. Listen to what he says now. Believe in God. Believe in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it were not so, I would have told you. In other words, I wouldn't lie to you about this thing. For I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Now, I think that's a favorite one at funerals. And we oftentimes think of what Jesus just said as a future promise. I go to prepare a place for you, and there's a day coming when I'll come back for you and I'll bring you to that place that I go. But that's actually not what Jesus is talking about. This is actually, he's talking about it for us today. This is a today promise. It was only future for the disciples in the sense of it was going to take, a couple of months for this to get fully realized. He says, I go to prepare a place in the Father's house. Now, what's the Father's house represent? The presence of God. It's where God dwells. It represents in other words, Jesus says, I am going to God's presence. And I'm going to prepare a place for you in God's presence. And if I prepare a place for you in God's presence, then I will come and bring you so that you may be in God's presence. And if you follow what he says, because he goes on and says, you know the way. And they're all like, what are you talking about? We don't know the way to the Father's, we don't know how to get there. And Jesus says, I am the way. And then he goes on and he begins to speak of the Spirit. And he begins to speak of, I will send you the Spirit of God. And he will dwell in you. And I will dwell in you. And the Father will abide in you. He says, I won't leave you as orphans. It's not that Jesus left and one day he'll come back to bring us into God's presence, because if that were the case, you're an orphan. You've been left until he comes back for you one day. But he specifically says, I won't leave you as an orphan. I will come. But he says, I will come by the Spirit. I will send my Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit will come, and he will dwell. And when he dwells in you, I dwell in you. And if I dwell in you, the Father is dwelling within you. You are in the presence of God. You know, God does not promise we will never taste hardship. And does not promise that we will never taste death. But the promise is that God is with you now, and that you will be in his presence. And then if you're in his presence now, you can be in his presence forever. And even if you do die, you will live, because the voice of resurrection will resurrect you. And in the meantime, between death and resurrection, you can trust that God will hold you in his presence. And Paul says the way we know this is by the Spirit, because the Spirit is given as a deposit of our inheritance to come. And so we have the Spirit of God today. We are in the presence of God today. He's not distant when life is hard. He is with you. He knows what it's like to suffer. He knows what it's like to be tested and to be tempted. He is kind, and he is compassionate, and he is gracious, and he is merciful, and he weeps over the devastation that we encounter in life. But he has the answers, because he is the answer. And he's on top of all this, he has promised to create a new world, one in which he promises to wipe away every tear. And I love, when you read the book of Revelation, he says, I will wipe away every tear. And that day when heaven and earth are united in the resurrection, he'll wipe away. And I love that image. He'll wipe away. Like, generally speaking, you don't wipe away other people's tears. Right? If someone's crying, you tried to wipe away their tears, you'd probably poke them in the eye. Like, the eye is like the most sensitive part of the entire head. Like you wipe your own tears, right? When you start to cry, you do this. The Bible says that God will wipe away all tears. I just think it's an amazing, beautiful picture. It just speaks of that tenderness and speaks of the tenderness of God. It speaks of the compassion of God. You know, it's so tragic when someone thinks, and it's understandable, but it's tragic when we go through something hard and we just think God somehow is just distant and doesn't care, or is too busy on something else, or he's God and somehow he's above all this. And the gospel is such a beautiful message that is not the case. God is not distant from us. God is not uncaring. As a matter of fact, he cares more deeply than we do. As a matter of fact, he is the God who himself suffers. And he enters into the ultimate suffering that he may one day finally remove it all from us. And in the meantime, he is with us. And he weeps when we weep. And he's the answer when we need an answer. And he's promised that one day it'll all be different. And then I think most importantly for our time now is he promises that those who put their trust in him, he makes this very amazing promise. If you will put your trust in Jesus, he will prove himself faithful to you. He will prove himself faithful to you if you will put your trust in him. And that is good news. And I know, I'm preaching to the choir, right? But again, I just wanted to not only encourage you, encourage myself. When I preach, it's me encouraging myself, and you're kind of listening. I pretty much just preach out of what I'm going through, And but I think more importantly, I just want to encourage us during this time that we have a wider responsibility to the society in which God has placed us, to the world that you live in. I know sometimes you can get overwhelmed by, there's a lot of need in the whole world, but the reality is you have a world that you live in, And we have a responsibility to that world to be able to be a light and to bring this good news and to help the world understand and see that there is a God who loves them. And there's a lot of, I'm fascinated with the question, what is God doing? Where is God? Well, he's present. Like, what is going on? Like, is there a purpose in this? And I don't think it's wise for Christians to say this is somehow God's judgment or somehow God sent this, because I'm not aware that God has said that himself. And we want to be careful not to put words in his mouth. I don't think he did, but there's always, always, always a message in everything. Everything has a message, if you will. And I think it was C.S. Lewis. And if you haven't had a chance to read C.S. Lewis, he's just an amazing thinker and has some incredible, an amazing writer. And he talks about sometimes how it's just easy in pleasure to kind of ignore God. He says something like, God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts in our pain. And his point was just that sometimes things that are hard are, there's a message. And part of the message in something like this is you have to face the fact that we live in a very dangerous world and we're very vulnerable. And we have to face things like our own vulnerability and our own mortality and the fragility. I mean, isn't it amazing how we go from a rip-roaring economy to wondering if this is not going to be the Great Depression again in a matter of like that, so fragile. And times like this, just that message gets shouted very, very loud. And we want to be able to bring light and bring comfort and most importantly, bring the greatest message of hope the world has ever heard. All right. Man, that was so much more fun to preach live than on a video. And, it really is just so good to see all of you guys. I can't tell you how hard this has been, huh? Well, first I want to tell everybody how much I miss you guys. I was like having a personal moment here. I needed that person. I know you want answers. I just needed a personal moment with my congregation. Because we really have. You could tell us, I'm kind of the more extrovert. And it's been hilarious. I mean, some of the introverts are like, I've been practicing my whole life for this. Like, this is perfect. I love this whole lockdown thing. Like, we should definitely continue the social isolation. This is perfect. And all the extroverts are like going out of their minds. All right. So what was your question? All right. So next week, we're going to do 2 services next week. And you do have to sign up online. Again, at this point, we have this cap of 49 per service, so just to manage that online. You can go to it's on our website, but you have to have the link. So we are not publicizing that we're open, primarily just because we just don't have the room, and now's not the time to quite do that. But if you go, you'll have an email. If you're not getting our emails, by the way, please let us know. We either call the office, talk to Shannon, send her an email, shannon@rolcf.net, and you'll get the link and go ahead and sign up. This service actually was full in 3 hours, which I thought was very encouraging. And so make sure you sign up early for next week. And again, I'm really, really hoping that we'll just be back with more capacity. And as long as we can get more capacity, we probably don't even have to have registration because we have plenty of room. Especially if we do 2 services, we'll be good. All right, Veronica. When you go to sign up, it'll say it's full. That's either. So there'll be a 9 a.m. service and a 10:30 a.m. service, and the 10:30 has the kids. So if there's no kids in your wider family or whatever, then maybe sign up for the 9 o'clock. Or if you don't want your kids to go into the Kingdom Kids. So, all right. Deb. We are only doing kids church for the ages 3 to 12, right? Is that right, Jess? 3 to 12. So we don't have infant care at this point. And so, yeah. All right. And the kids, obviously, it's impossible to keep kids 6 feet away from each other. We're not going to bother trying. And so we will limit the class sizes to 10. But if that makes you uncomfortable as a parent, not a problem. Just don't have your kids go in to the Kingdom Kids. If it doesn't bother you, then by all means, send them in. All right? All right. We love you guys. God bless. Thanks for being here this morning. If you're at the 9 o'clock service next week, we're going to kind of ask you to park like over on this side, and we'll probably have you go out that entrance. And that's honestly, it's just because the town really feels a lot more comfortable if we do stuff like that. So we'll have you exit that way so that those coming in for the second service, you don't accidentally hug each other or something. Sorry. I'm not trying to make light. It's just my warped sense of humor. All right. God bless you guys. You guys are dismissed.